As a small business owner, your to-do list is long. The Knot makes advertising easy and connects you with the right couples at the right time. Visit vendors.theknot.com/podcast for 15% off your first month with code podcast15.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 394. The Warrior Next Door podcast guys are back with more interview clips. Tony Lupo and Ryan Fairfield are back from the Warrior Next Door podcast to share selected clips of veteran interviews of people who were there before and during the fighting. You can find it all on thewarriornextdoor.com. Tony and Ryan, thank you very much for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having us, Ray. I would say one more thing, Ray. We're going to be like jumping in too because we're excited, like a couple of yellow labs on point right now. So so we're going to need to calm down too. Just give us a few minutes and we'll calm down. So, all right, go ahead, Rhino.
Deal.
Well, Ray, thank you so much for having us. We had a great time with you last year. I think it was almost exactly a year ago that you had us on. And so we're extremely excited. We're going to be probably talking way too fast today because we're very excited to be here. So anyway, Tony, go ahead and jump in.
Oh, man, yeah. So, Ray, just so you know, when we had a chance to be on your podcast last year, we didn't realize how much of an impact it would have on our podcast. I mean, because of us being on your show and you introducing us to your fans, dude, we went from, a new podcast, a few months old with a few episodes to actually having an audience. Wow. And I got a question for you. Yeah. Why is so much of your audience in Australia and New Zealand?
I have graced both grounds with my presence, but I don't think that's it. No, I have I do another series of podcasts with a partner, Cameron Riley, and he's Australian. He lives in Australia. I think maybe osmosis, it's grown over there a lot more than it should. The New Zealand, I don't know. I think they probably think that I'm one of their hobbits and they're supporting me. I really don't know, but no, I'm very appreciative and thankful. And however it happens, it happens, right?
Oh, it was just awesome. Ryan and I were just so giddy, being able to interact with people who said that they heard about us on your podcast. Aww. And they interact with us and they talk about how much they love the work that you do and how and you said this when we had the interview basically a year ago this time when we first started our podcast, that we really complement each other well, right? I mean, exactly. You do this incredible amount of research and literally go through the day-to-day history of World War II, and we're trying to bring voices to that from the human beings that you're talking to from the books and the research that you've read.
Yeah, I literally wanted to say, because I told my wife this last night that y'all were coming back on the show, and then she said something smart like, well, you should just have them on every November. I'm like, fine. If it's going to be a Thanksgiving thing, then just book it in your books now, every November. No, but you're right. I do, and I mean this sincerely. I do sleep better at night knowing that you guys are doing what you're doing, because really I shouldn't be telling the story of World War II. I should be talking to the people that were actually there. And I feel guilty sometimes that I don't travel and that I don't meet more of these people. So the fact that you guys are doing this, I'll keep telling the story, and together people can get a much better picture of what happened. And that's really what it comes down to. So I am equally thankful that you guys, even Ryan, are doing what you're doing. I really do appreciate it. I know, Tony, you probably do most of the work, but it really is appreciated. I'm just joking.
So for those that didn't listen to last year's podcast, it turns out that one of us, and I blamed Ryan, actually insulted our most gracious host, Ray Harris.
I don't believe I insulted
He didn't insult me. He stood up to me, and I took it as an insult. That's why don't do that. Don't do that. How dare you, sir? No. My kids give me a hard time, so I'm not going to take it from Ryan. So anyway, it's on like Donkey Kong is all I wanted to say. That's all I wanted to say. No, I did want to ask, so you've been doing this for a while now. You've got a pretty good body of work under your belt. I did want to ask, is there any commonalities, any traits versus maybe the soldiers versus the civilians, because the one thing that I keep running into is the humbleness. Oh, I had a job to do. I did it. It's no big deal. It's behind me. I've moved on. I'm like, no. You're bona fide heroes. Civilians, military, it doesn't matter. You went through hell and back and you survived. That makes you a hero.
Well, can I give you an example of one that happened today, like this morning?
Yes.
So Ryan had a chance to go to a homecoming and present at this homecoming. Where was it located? It was near your hometown, Rhino.
Yeah, it's Greenfield, Illinois. So it's like South Central Illinois.
Okay.
So he gave this really amazing 45-minute presentation that gave an overview of some of the work that we're doing and including some people from that area that where Ryan grew up in. This morning, we received on our Facebook page a message from someone who had attended there, who joined the Navy during World War II in 1943, was a Navy corpsman, and then fought in the Pacific, or basically saved lives in the Pacific.
Right.
And what he wrote in there just blew me away. He goes, I don't really know if you'll be too interested in hearing my story. I only landed on one island in Okinawa. Right? It's like, oh, yeah, you're right. Well, if you just did that, then we don't really care. You got to at least be on 4 islands before we care about it.
It's a 4-island minimum. I think you'll agree.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So here's this guy. It's like, I only participated in the last war in the Pacific before the atom bomb was dropped. Right. It was the largest island and the most casualties that we incurred in the Central Pacific. I only did that.
It's still a big deal. Still a big deal. You still get a medal. You're still a hero, and you should be honored and remembered. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we get that all the time. And in fact, speaking of honoring and remembering, so we got 3 sets of clips that we want to share with you and your audience today from interviews we've conducted over the past year.
Right.
One is Marta Warner, who was a civilian, a young girl, during the rise and fall of the Nazi regime in Germany. It is going to dovetail beautifully. I had a chance to listen to some of your earlier podcasts on the Nazification of Germany.
Right.
And we can't wait for you to hear these clips and to make some comments on them, because I think there's a lot of people in the United States. I won't cast aspersion on other people. I grew up in the 80s with the idea that the Germans were like uniquely qualified to be an authoritarian race that killed Jewish people. And after you get older and you start talking to people from that area, you start to realize the role that incrementalism plays in having an educated society completely go off the rails towards what they did.
Right.
So that's number one. Number 2 is a guy named Bill Parker, and he talked about humility, right? You talked about, the commonality that these people are kind of like, yeah, I kind of just did this thing.
Right.
Well, Bill landed on Omaha Beach and was part of a regiment, the 116th, that incurred more casualties than any regiment on Omaha Beach, which incurred more casualties than any of the beaches.
Right.
He was one of the first boots on the ground there, and he really didn't come out and start talking about his experiences or getting recognized for them. It's maybe 4 years ago, after his wife passed away. So up until then, he was just this guy that was doing stuff, and people didn't really even know his experiences.
Right.
And then the third one, Ray, is a guy named Mooney Stahl. And Mooney Stahl is a Marine in the 2nd Regiment of the 2nd Division who fought on Guadalcanal and Tarawa.
Wow.
And we've got a couple of clips there. So just wanted to basically let your audience know that we've got 3 very different kind of clips that we can play that they may enjoy.
Absolutely. And I completely agree with you. The neighbor next door, the person who you bump into at the grocery store, you don't know what they've been through, and some of these older people have been to hell and back. What's you see this common meme on the internet? It's like, you might be cool, but you're not this guy in Guadalcanal with 1 bullet left, that kind of thing. I mean, these guys were, and ladies were absolute heroes, and hopefully we or our children never have to go through anything like that again. We should certainly celebrate them, but at the same time, let's learn from this and not repeat some mistakes that others have made.
Well, Tony and I were recording a podcast series this weekend while he's been here in Oklahoma visiting, and this fellow served aboard the USS San Francisco, and the USS San Francisco was a cruiser that that was the second most decorated ship of the Pacific War.
Wow.
And we were talking about the fact that, that ship during the Battle of Guadalcanal and Savo Island took 45 hits from Japanese ships, and it didn't sink.
Yes.
And it's because there was no hits below the waterline. And I was just telling Tony that during that conversation that this war, World War II, was the last time really that you've had to worry about your ship sinking from out underneath you, because it hasn't been an issue since then. It could happen again, obviously.
Right.
But that war was so ferocious. I mean, from top to bottom.
Yeah.
The ferocity and the efficiency of killing the other side was just off the charts and so frightening. That's why these guys and gals that served during World War II really went through the hottest crucible of all the 20th century and 21st so far. So amazing stuff. They're all heroes,
Yeah. My biggest challenge is Monday mornings. So I will never be on par with them, and that's okay. They did what they had to do, and hopefully the rest of us won't. And you just hope that society gets better as it goes on.
Well, what's interesting, Ray, is there's a lot of people who have asked us, and I'm sure they've asked you, why are you so interested in the history of World War II in particular?
Right.
And I think a lot of people think that history is just about, old dead dudes and memorizing dates.
And maps.
But as we look at what's going on in the world right now, in the Ukraine and Russia, no one thought that World War II/World War I trench armored warfare battles and big countries attacking smaller countries for territorial gains, we all thought that was so passé, so 19th century, right?
Exactly.
And so being able to study and understand these sorts of things that happened in World War II, I mean, it's just, it's just the repeat mode on a CD player, right? We need to understand and heed those warnings. And actually, that's a really awesome segue to the Marta Warner clips that we want to play for you.
Yes, please.
Absolutely. So just a little bit of background before we play our first clip. So Marta Warner, like I said, she was born in 1931. So by the time 1941 rolled around, she was 10 years old. She was a teenager during the war. She was born in Frankfurt, Germany, to a middle-class household. She would have been just your common garden variety sort of civilian in Germany during the war. And her experiences on seeing the change from the sort of educational system and the narrative, the historical narrative that was changing for her as a young girl, and how confused she was by it. And then watching that morph into a full-blown war where they got bombed out of their house in Frankfurt, had to go out east into the Silesia area, which is modern-day Poland, but it would have been Germany at that time. Her dad was working in a war factory there, and then the Russians came and pushed them out, and she became a refugee. And so really what you're going to hear in these handful of clips we have is the realization that her world was being turned upside down because of the Nazi Party, and then her having to run away as a refugee, and some also other experience that she has. And I want to add one more thing. What she said, and this resonates because, again, I listened to your podcast on the Nazification of Germany, and it was really well done. One of the things that you said, and you're going to hear her say, is if you want to change a country's narrative, if you want to get them to think differently about their history, their past, and what it means for how they interact with the world, you don't do it through the math books, you don't do it through the physics books, you do it through the history books. She said that was the thing that changed considerably, and she remembered reading the older history books, and she got in a lot of trouble for challenging her teachers, these Nazi teachers that came in. And so I want to add one more thing, Ray. You and Ryan and I are all in the same space. We love history, we want to share it with people. And for those people who just think, like I said before, it's about old dudes and dates, they couldn't be more wrong. History is the narrative of our country. It actually shapes our culture. So we're going to start off with clip number one about she's already been going to school. She's been seeing these things. And now there are millions of people being inducted into the Hitler Youth Program.
All right.
Were there uniforms? Did you guys go on retreats? I mean, what sort of activities were they trying to do to kind of inculcate the youth into the idea of the Nazi Party?
Okay, to start with, yes, there were uniforms. Okay. Yes, you had, I can't remember how many meetings there were per week. 2-3 hours at a time.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
We would sing specific songs. Siehst du im Osten das Morgenrot, ein Zeichen zur Freiheit, zur Sonne. Do you see the morning red in the east? It's a sign to freedom.
Yeah.
We hold together whether life or death may come whatever there may. Mag kommen, was immer da wolle. Stop with not believing and with the waiting. The time is now. Hört auf mit dem Haaren, hör auf mit dem Haaren, noch fliegt. We still have German blood in our veins. Noch fließt uns deutsches Blut in den Adern. Volk ans Gewehr, Volk onto the arms. Volk on take the arms. Okay, songs like that. We kept singing, and we were knitting stockings, socks, and gloves, mittens for the soldiers and scarves. Us girls, I don't know, the boys, and they taught us how to shoot.
Wow. I don't know about you, Ray, but when Ryan and I heard her singing during the interview, and there's something about listening to German sing in particular that can be a little chilling. Ryan, could you describe Marta a little bit?
Yeah, so when we, the way we were introduced to Marta was through a former coworker that Tony and I both used to work with, and he reached out to us because he'd been listening to our podcast. He's like, hey, I've got a guy that I go to church with. His grandmother was in the Hitler Youth. And he's like, you guys should try to interview her. We're like, oh my gosh, yes, we would love to do that. So we coordinated this. We were able to interview her in roughly February or March of this year, 2022. And we walk into her house, and and it's Tony and I and her grandson. And Marta is not in the living room yet. Right. And we was like, oh, where's Marta? And he's like, oh, she's in the back room. She'll be out shortly. So like, okay. So then she walks out. And Marta is about 4'10". She's a really short lady. Right. But she commands the room. I'm sure. And she comes in and she's like, "What are you doing here?" And like immediately. And immediately I hide behind Tony, And so, good move. And Tony's like,
she's like, what is all of this equipment? What are you going to do with this? And she's going on and on. Ryan and I look at her grandson because we're like, did you even tell her that we're coming over to do this? Right. And then Ryan, what did her grandson do?
Oh, I noticed he was standing off towards the back of the living room, just snickering and laughing. Because he knew she was just messing with us the whole time, But she stuck out her hand to shake our hand, and she's looking us in the eye, and it was intimidating. It was it was really intimidating. We were even when we started the interview, you could hear us stammering and everything because we were kind of nervous to interview her. Absolutely. This is our first person that we had interviewed with this sort of a background, and so it was. And it turned out to be probably the most compelling and impactful and educational interviews that I've ever been a part of. So it was really fascinating.
If I could real quick, I was noticing that, it just reminds you of stuff that's going on today. And we were talking about history repeating itself. When a group of people tells you we're in an emergency situation, we all have to get together, we all have to band together,
Yep.
Generally, they're selling you something and or they're wanting you to be distracted from something else that you should be noticing. Clearly, in her case, the Reichstag fire comes along, Hitler gets emergency powers. He's able to strip civil rights away from everybody. And so by that Christmas of 1933, he's pretty much running the place. He can do whatever he wants. And so she's starting to see the far end of that when the history books change, because you're right, if you can control the narrative, if I can control every piece of information or the narrative that you think happened, even though I'm lying, it becomes your reality because you don't know any better. And they're literally trying to rewrite history to justify what they're about to do, which is take on every other power in Europe.
And you heard that in the song she was singing. The sun rises in the east. Our freedom is there. Our homeland is there. You know, I mean, they were being inculcated at a very young age to think of the growth of their country. So you're right, Ray, is once you develop a narrative or a culture for your company or country using history, it's going to dictate what sort of actions that country takes when it plays with its neighbors. And we can see that in Russia, Iran, the United States. Every country interacts with the other countries around them based on their historical narrative and perspective, which is why I went from, as a younger man, thinking history was a passion project, something that I could just take as a blow-off class while the harder classes awaited me, to realizing that for a civil society, it's probably the most important curriculum we have is history.
Yeah, and it always gets deeper. It always gets more complicated. You know, you learn the basics in high school or middle school, and then you go to college and you learn some more details, and then you start reading on your own and you learn more details. It can get very convoluted very quickly. But yeah, it's the general narrative that the people believe is going to dictate how they react, whether they want to be defensive, whether they want to be open-hearted. And clearly they're being told a story. Your future is in the East towards Russia. We have to take what they have, and then we'll be free or happy or something.
It is. And so how does a society go from civil society, the Weimar Republic, that's just trying to make cars and typewriters, to something that invades, like the Soviet Union is responsible for 30 million deaths? Well, this next clip speaks to that.
It is not as easy to understand for the American society, because it was all so small to start. It was just this little step at a time, and people who were old enough to understand could do one of two things: keep the mouth shut or get killed. There was no choice in the matter, and this is something that they don't understand out there. There was no choice, none.
This is the thing that was so frightening to me when I listened to it, and my mouth was open the entire time that we were interviewing her, because her delivery is perfect and spot on, but she starts telling us these things like this that you see happening today around you, and it doesn't matter what side of the coin you're on politically, you see things, and it scares you, the hypersensitivity, the hyper focus of media on current topics and the biases and the spin, it you can look at it from either side. But she described how when she was in school, they had a really beautiful teacher that wore long dresses and these big Florentine hats. And every day she'd come in and she'd say, good morning, children, let us pray. And it was a very nurturing environment until there was a summer break, and they come back into school, and that teacher's gone, and now it's a different teacher who's all Heil Hitler. Everything's Heil Hitler. There's no more God in the room, in the classroom. It is all about Nazi Germany and patriotism and learning the new history that was coming in the new history books that were being taught in school. And like she said, it was these little steps that would happen where people, businesses were trying to survive. They may not have necessarily believed in Nazism, but if you want to feed your family, if you want to keep your business that you've had for generations, you better toe the line. So
exactly. And what's that analogy? Boiling the frog. You just turn it up a little bit more each time, and it's a subtle change. But you go along, and then suddenly you look back and see how much you've changed, and normally by then it's too late.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And again, going back to these are how the two podcasts complement each other. Mm-hmm. So when I listen to your Nazification of Germany series, it is amazingly detailed. You go through every element, every law, every assassination that took place, every backroom dealing, right? That allowed Hitler to eventually take power in an autocratic way. That I love listening to that. And then you get a chance to listen to something like this, where you hear the human being
on the other end of it. Yeah,
going, we didn't know what the hell was going on. I went to school one year and we were doing this, and the next year there's a teacher there. She also talks a story where she goes to see her neighbor, and every day she would say, "Hey, how you doing this morning?" And he's like, "No more good morning. Heil Hitler."
Jeez.
And there was another instance where a little girl, her friend, got beat by her dad, and they hauled him off to a camp, not because he hit her, because he hit her while she was wearing her Hitler Youth uniform.
Oh, it's sacrosanct. Do not touch this. Do not put blood on it.
It is. And unfortunately, for all the national pride they felt and all this sense of superiority that the textbooks were trying to inculcate their youth, it didn't exactly turn out well for them. So on this next clip we have, she talks about her firsthand personal experiences with the bombings in Frankfurt, her hometown.
Okay.
You have to think in terms of the bombings. You hear the swish of the falling bomb. You don't know exactly where it's going to hit, but by the sound, you know whether it's close or further away. Okay? They dropped what we call Brandbomben, which were bombs that ignited during the falling, so they came down as fire. So this way, the fire was initiated immediately. Okay, so everything was burned. You really have to live through that to even get a glimpse of what your feelings are. Because when you run through the heat at the smell and the broken glass, at the swishing of the bombs and the explosions, you don't think. Your brain does not work the way it normally does. All it wants for you is to survive whatever way you can.
Yeah.
You get the point. I mean, she's describing the sheer terror that they felt as civilians, just trying to survive in this onslaught. They fear their government. They fear the Russians coming from the east. They fear the Allied bombs coming down from above.
Yeah.
And they're in a pressure cooker, and all the sides are closing in on them from all directions.
Right.
All they can do is go underground to escape it, and it was just frightening to hear what her family had to endure, and it's a chilling interview to hear her perspective on things.
Well, if I could real quick, you just reminded me of something that's very important. She wasn't a warrior. She didn't go into battle, but she darn sure is going to grow with PTSD. I mean, how could she not? There's just fear, sudden death everywhere around her. At first, it was manufactured and it was made up by the Nazi government, but now that they've started the war, it is true. There are people all around them trying to kill them. And one last thing, there's a speech. I've been looking for it for like 7 years now. Well, not a speech. Churchill said something to FDR along the lines of, we have to bomb the people because they work in the factories. We have to bomb the people to break their hearts so they don't keep supporting their government. Basically, people are now a verified target. People are now a target that we have to go after. Yeah, and so between us and the British bombed the heck out of a lot of civilians. Obviously, everybody else did too. But it is the new reality that is total war.
Totally. In fact, if you look at the casualty numbers here in World War II, there were more civilians that died than the soldiers did.
Jesus. Yeah.
That's a fact.
I didn't think about that because I didn't want to, but it makes sense.
Yeah. It did. And it was because it was a total war, just like you described, with people like Marta, one of hundreds of millions across the world that was enduring this because of decisions their government made to go to war with other countries for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
And you look at what's going on in the world today, and there's still larger countries trying to bomb the holy hell out of smaller countries and trying to attack the civilians. It's the same thing.
Yeah, every generation has to keep a really close eye on their government because they'll try things because that's what government does. They benefit themselves, they perpetuate the benefits, and so you have to keep an eye on them. Same thing with the Nazi government, but they had a complete clamp down on society, so it was a little easier for them. But diligence is the order of the day. Yeah,
and you mentioned this in your earlier podcast, and we mentioned it during ours independently.
Right,
is if you're living in a civil society and you're seeing laws and regulations and legislation and rulers or presidents or whatever, and if these things are going to make the people smaller and less powerful within the government, then you're going down the wrong path.
Right. And eventually to catch
that's
up
what was
to
happening.
Exactly.
It will catch up to you. In fact, let's talk about it catching up to you. So should we talk about the bombings? They had to move out east, away from Frankfurt.
Wow.
Because it was uninhabitable. And her dad was working in a munitions factory in Silesia, which again is in modern day Poland. And they weren't there more than a year. And then the Russians came in from the east. And these next two clips are going to describe some of that.
Okay.
The last one there is a freight train, open freight cars. And we're in there, and it's January, end of January, beginning of February. Eastern Germany, it's freezing. And there we are, in that open train. And I climbed up to see out, and as far as the eye can see, there are people walking away with carts and wagons and animals, whatever you can think of as far as the eye can see, people running away to nowhere. Nobody knows where they're going, only running away from what's coming. And unless you experience that, you cannot possibly imagine what that's like.
Wow.
It cannot. You've got to experience that, because the kind of fear that is with that, you can't explain to anybody. You don't know what's coming, where you're going, or if you're even going to live. We are in that train, in that car. Mind you, there's no food, there's no water, and there's no bathroom either, for that matter. Okay?
Yeah.
So the whole thing you gonna sort of have to imagine. And there is this very, very old man, and he dies. And the women pick him up and throw him over. What are they going to do with the corpse?
I know, right?
Okay? So the women dump him. And I remember, these are some of the things I really vividly remember, because it's awful.
You know, I just wanted to say real quick, you know, you think back to the images from when we left Afghanistan a few years ago, and the chaos at that airport.
Yeah.
All the people coming through the gates trying to get in. Our soldiers were kind of keeping some order of sanity by trying to let few people in at a time. And then all the people running down the runway trying to get on the planes and everything.
Yeah.
Because they knew that the Taliban and ISIS or whoever were all coming. That was one small little little, I guess one little flashpoint there compared to what this is like.
Yeah.
Germany, it's the entire population that's getting squeezed harder and harder every day. I cannot imagine the chaos and it would be hell on earth.
Well, and the other thing, Ray, you mentioned earlier is the PTSD element of this.
Right.
Excuse me. You just heard her at the very end of that clip talk about, these are the things I remember. These are the things that I just can't forget.
They're burned in.
And we're here to tell you that we have spared your audience some of the really terrible memories that she had. We kind of made this PG.
Right.
And so if you think what you just heard is bad, some of the things that she experienced on the podcast, to me, would drive most people absolutely batshit crazy. It's amazing that she was able to overcome that. It speaks a little bit to the resiliency of human beings, but also to their frailties. There's no doubt she suffers from PTSD.
Right. Yeah. Because if that's a memory that she can still call on easily enough at age 97, it has been burned into her. She's never going to forget that. And that's another thing. The government should always remember, as bad as war is, what's even worse is losing it. And then suddenly you've got the invaders coming into your country. They're going to get retribution, revenge, whatever you want to call it. So again, it's the people that are suffering.
No, you're right. I don't think I've ever heard someone put it that way before, but you're absolutely correct. The worst, if war's bad enough, that's great, but then losing it really sucks, because where the spoils go, they go to the victors, and you never know what kind of victor is going to come out of that. Yeah,
because the one thing, and again, we can't change, but geography determines destiny in so many ways. And so America was pretty much unscathed. Yes, we lost a lot of ships on the various coasts, but as far as actually being bombed, as having people run into underground shelters, we didn't do that. We didn't suffer that. We don't know what that's like. And for those people, that was a way of life for at least 5 years, if not longer. So again, it's all perspective. And like you were saying earlier, it all goes back to what's in the history books. What is the narrative that our children are being taught? Don't be afraid. Don't be weak. Stand up, be strong, be proud, and you'll be a greater people for it. Not in the terms of combat, but just being honest with yourself and honest with your past and dealing with it the best way you can.
Amen. Amen. I couldn't have summed it up any better, Ray. So, okay, that was, we think that's pretty heavy. When we sat there for 2 hours, we walked out there, our brain was like putty.
I bet.
So
I would have been numb.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And we're not done. She's still with us. She's still feisty. She's still frightening. And we're going to set up some time this spring to go meet up with her some more. So
just the fact that she's scared y'all, I got to be honest, that makes me a little happy. Puts a little smile on my face. No, I'm just joking. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Go ahead, Rhino.
So next, what we're going to do, Ray, is we'll move on to our next veteran. This is Tech Sergeant Bill Parker. We featured him on our series earlier this year.
Right.
And we were lucky enough to be able to be invited to go with him back to Normandy for the first time since he landed on D-Day this summer.
Right.
Bill was in the 116th Infantry Regiment of the 29th Infantry Division. He was in Company E. He landed at H Hour on D-Day. He was supposed to land at Easy Green.
Right.
They got pushed off course as they came up to the beach there, and landed about 1,500 yards to the left as they were coming in Easy Red area, and they were intermingled with the 16th Infantry Regiment, the 1st Infantry Division. Bill was a wire cutter. He was at the very front of his landing craft. And what he's going to describe here is it's a bit of a lengthy clip, but if you want to trim it down, you're welcome to do it. But he describes everything from getting off the boat and loading into the landing craft from the ship, all the way through to landing, running across the beach, and what he endured there. So we'll go ahead and get started with that.
We come down those rope ladders, and kind of a net outfit, it wasn't just one ladder. Anyway, sometimes they was 20 foot away from that boat. Next time they was up against it. So I was in the wire cutting section, the leader of it. So I had to get off first, which I did. And we got in a landing craft. There's 33 men in it, besides the bar cutting section, plus the Navy people. Anyway, I had 5 men in the bar cutting section. We had what they call Bangalore torpedoes. It was iron pipe with amytal in each end and dynamite in the middle. We got off in water about waist deep. We had a big pack on our back, plus that amytal torpedo, plus our M1 rifles, a few hand grenades. And we had 2 bandoliers of shells around us, plus the ones in our belt. Mm-hmm. So it was pretty well loaded. And we had to go across that water. We couldn't go back. There wasn't nothing behind us. Mm-hmm. So we had to go forward. And I went across the beach with a machine gun hitting the ground 3 foot in front of me, just knocking up sand. And I couldn't stop, couldn't get any faster. He never did raise it high enough to hit me. I got up to the shore then, and shooting machine guns was in those pillboxes, and we didn't have anything to knock them out with. Just an M1 rifle and a hand grenade. We threw our hand grenades at that hole, but we didn't knock them out. Man over the battleships said he had orders to shoot way over our heads, not close to us at all. Seemed we was hung up. He ordered the battleships in close to shore, lowered their big guns, and he shot about 6, 7 feet, 8 over our heads, knocked them pillboxes out, and he turned us loose. I give the Navy credit for saving the invasion.
Yeah, so just imagine this. Bill's running across the beach. The machine gun is kicking up sand in front of him. They blow the wire. They actually turn around because the rest of the landing craft is supposed to be following them.
Right.
They turn around, and there's no one behind them. Oh. So when Bill got off the landing craft, a shell hit their landing craft. And Bill believed up until recently that everyone was killed because there was no one behind them.
Right.
I've done some research looking at after action reports. The only landing craft that was hit by a shell in the first wave was Bill's landing craft. But it did not. What happened was it penetrated the right side. It exploded inside the landing craft, killed several men, dazed the rest of them. But when the ramp went down, Bill and his team were off like a rifle shot.
Right.
It appears that shell hit right as they left the landing craft. Oh. And that's why they weren't behind them. The after action report states that these men were all dazed. They actually climbed out over the side of the landing craft in a panic.
Right.
And it took them a bit to gather their senses. Some of them were washed under the landing craft and killed. Mm. And so when Bill got up to the wire, they cut the wire, and they immediately lay down on their bellies to try to take out the pillboxes. And as the ships came in and started shooting the pillboxes, Bill is lying literally 30 feet away from the pillbox that the Navy ships are shelling. And he lost about 90% of his hearing on D-Day from that happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's still alive.
So he's still alive today. He's a cowboy. He grew up as a cowboy. He still, at 98 years old, rides horses. He was roping calves. He was roping calves up until about a year ago.
Of course he was.
He is the salt of the earth. He's so soft-spoken, such a great guy, great personality and sense of humor.
Right.
He actually made it up the bluff at Omaha Beach, and he had there were no officers around him because, his commanding officer was actually killed a few landing craft down. And all these stragglers started following Bill. So he gets up to the top of the bluff at the end of the day at around midnight, and there's the main road that goes all along the coast there, and they camped in a ditch. And they all asked Bill, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And Bill said, well, I'm staying here because I'm out of ammo, and there's fighting going on all around us, and we can't do a bit of good without any ammunition. So the next day, he went back to the beach, and he had to get more ammunition, and he said, I knew that all those dead bodies had ammunition on them. So he actually got ammo from the corpses on Omaha Beach.
Yeah,
and he said on his as he was going down to the beach, he went into that pillbox that was shelled by the Navy, and where the machine gunner was shooting at him as he was coming across the beach. He went into the pillbox. He saw the German laying over the machine gun, and he said, "You're through. You didn't get me." Is that not John Wayne? But I believe him. I believe him.
Yeah.
And he was looking at the layout. He said it wasn't any bigger than like a bathroom in there. It was not really big. There were dead Germans everywhere, and he was looking at the machine gun, and he noticed on the wall next to the machine gun were painted marks for distance, and they were just instructed to shoot beaten paths, that they'd fire for a few minutes, they'd fire at the next position. It was indiscriminate, so they'd make a web of machine gun, patterns across the beach.
Right.
So it whenever he was not getting hit, it was just sheer luck, because he said he realized then that the guy was just doing what he was instructed to do, which was just fire at in this certain progression.
Wow. That's yeah.
Anyway, this. Go ahead, Tony.
Well, just really quick for this clip is and for the audience, we don't have a lot of film footage of Omaha Beach, the most contested beach, because they were lost on D-Day from the film groups that were and all that. And so you got a situation where, it was 78 years ago. Yeah. A lot of those men passed away. A lot of them passed away on the beach. There can't be more than a handful of men left in the United States who could even understand a little bit of what Bill talked about.
That's staggering. That is absolutely staggering.
Well, so Ryan's going to play the next clip. Yeah. The next clip is we're going to fast forward all the way through the war. And if people want to listen to the podcast and get more detail, they can do that.
Please.
There were things that he experienced that were absolutely horrifying, and they affected him later in life, and that's what this clip's about.
Just real quick, and I apologize, but the clip that you just played, that where as an Army guy complimenting a Navy guy, you could solve world peace with that clip. I mean, you know how much the branches fight each other and don't give any respect or that alone could save some. Anyway, tongue in cheek, but
you're right, Ray. But on top of that, it literally took a near-death experience for this Army guy to finally admit that the Navy was okay.
Yeah, he did okay. Thanks. Yeah, no, but that's worth pointing out. Yeah, go ahead.
Yep. All right.
Okay, here's the next clip here.
That was the kind of dreams I had, was of the dead people and boys I knew that died. I didn't know their names. I can see their faces now, but I can't name them. You got where you even dreaded to go to sleep. Yeah. You fought the war over. Of course, her being there made it a lot easier. Well, she'd wake me up in the middle of the night when I'd be crying in my sleep. She'd tell me the war's over, you're home. She never did ask me nothing about it, and I never told her anything. Now I wished I had her, but too late for that now.
Yeah, so the love of his life, Colleen, passed away in 2018.
Right.
And she truly was the love of his life. If you listen to the series, we spend the first episode talking about his youth and how he met her, and it's a Hollywood movie in the making. It's beautiful, you know. So, you know, what's amazing, and I'm sure you've come across this too, Ray, you know, a lot of these guys that get back from the war, and the code was you don't talk about it. You know, if you went through stuff, you did not talk about it. You didn't want to burden anyone else with your stories or your pain. And even him, he describes how he never talked to his wife about it. She never asked him about it. His brother passed away just, you know, probably 10 years ago. And he was in the Army Air Forces. He flew on B-29s.
Right.
He flew 30 missions on B-29s, and Bill didn't know until his funeral that his brother did that.
Whoa.
Yeah.
And that's just the way that it was.
That generation.
That generation. And you know, that keeping that bottled up for your entire life and not being able, you know how therapeutic it is to talk through things. You know, it helps. It's a release.
Yeah.
These guys are keeping the worst memories that they've ever been through in their life bottled up, pent up inside. No wonder they're having horrible nightmares.
Right.
No wonder they're grinding their teeth down to a nub at night while they sleep.
Yeah.
It's amazing, you know. One of the things that Tony and I realized, and it's been documented with actual academic papers, is the real benefit for veterans to talk about their experiences. And, you know, the best location to do it would be in reunion groups with your buddies that served alongside you.
Right.
But we've had great experiences with veterans that we interview that don't know us, seeing us more as a neutral player in this thing. So when they tell us something, they don't care what we think.
Exactly.
But they tell us at the end of the interview, I've told you things I've never told anyone. And we're no one special.
Right.
But we're a blank canvas for them, and it lets them get it off their chest. And it's amazing stuff, you know.
Could I just say real quick, okay, this is where it's going to start getting emotional, because I didn't realize this until you just said that you guys, inadvertently, or whatever the appropriate word is, you get to watch as these people who went through hell and back, some of them for years, you get to watch as the human brain tries to defend itself from memories, from pain, from horrible memories. They're doing the best they can. The brain is going to, you know, whether it's nightmares, grinding your teeth, the brain's going to it's going to come out somehow because they're not talking about it. And you're right, these people need to be listened to, whether it's their old buds or just like you said, just you, a neutral person. It would serve them so well. But I never thought about that before, about here's a couple of years of sheer hell, and now you're going to live another 60, 70, whatever years, and your brain has somehow got to deal with that.
Totally.
Yeah. Have you had the old dream that everybody has, especially if you've gone to college, where you have that dream where you wake up and it's the end of the semester and you realize that you forgot to go to a class the whole year?
I'm not ready for my exam.
Exactly.
Or I'm naked. Whatever.
I mean, think about that. That's PTSD for that segment of people.
Right.
Think about these guys.
Yeah.
Think about what they actually endured.
Exactly.
And they're keeping bottled up, and the dreams they must be having.
Yes.
It's crazy. So, sorry, Tony, go ahead.
No. So PTSD is something that's really important to Ryan and I. We've watched over the couple hundred interviews we've conducted. It manifests itself in a variety of ways, and one of the common things that we've learned is talking about it, getting therapy, get a hold of their battle buddies, going to reunions has been good medicine for all of them, including Bill. After his trip from Normandy, after being able to go to the beaches and seeing kids play on them instead of remembering the dead bodies, he made several comments to us while we were in Normandy hanging out with him. And subsequent to that, when Ryan's had a chance to visit him here locally in Tulsa, about how therapeutic that trip was, how he's able to replace some of those old visions with newer ones that were far less horrifying. So
great.
Yeah. Actually, what ended up happening was, after he stood at the overlook at the American Cemetery, looking over the very location where he landed on D-Day, he stood there for a few minutes, and everybody kind of gave him a few minutes to kind of gather himself. But we've got great photos of him just standing there, back to the camera, just just reflecting and looking out on things. And like Tony said, there were families playing, dogs and kids playing in the surf, people enjoying the beach. And he made a comment to one of the guys standing next to him, sure looks a lot different without all the dead bodies everywhere. and then he told us a few days later, he's like, he said, Ryan, last night was the first night, and I can't tell you how long, that I slept through the entire night. I slept soundly. And I thought, wow. Oh, well, that's great. I'm thinking, well, it's jet lag. He's, I made the connection, Then the next day, I went up to him again. I said, hey, are you still doing good? Are you still sleeping well? He goes, Ryan, last night was the first time since D-Day that I slept and didn't dream of dead bodies on the beach.
Oh, my God.
That trip, going back there after 78 years, helped wash away those traumatic memories of the beach and the dead bodies, which he said was the biggest problem that he was having.
Right.
And seeing the families enjoy it, the love and the adoration from the French people that were there really melted a lot of that away. So anyway.
What is it about these autumn, fall episodes that are just so emotional? I just interviewed a guy. He was telling me about his father was in the Merchant Marines, and he had this incredible life. He doesn't tell his son anything about it until age 12 when they're driving to Long Island. And so his father writes a book. He almost finishes it. He dies. He tells his son right before he dies, please finish my book. And I'm like, oh, my God, am I going to spend all of November and December crying? But but it's the least we can do for these people who have been through hell and back.
So price to pay.
Exactly. The fact that y'all were able to help him with that experience, priceless.
So I had a chance to listen to that episode that you just dropped.
Oh, yeah.
And it was absolutely amazing. The other thing that was amazing about that was his father was kind of a hoarder of various types of documents. Everything. And so you've got a situation where you've got a guy who's really intelligent. Yeah. He's seen amazing things and he's documented the hell out of it. Yeah. And so let's put it this way. That book made it to my reading list. And I really liked basically what you said was it was really two books. The first half was about all the amazing things that he did in his life, which could have just been a book.
Right.
And then he did all of these things after that in the Merchant Marine, which were like holy crap moments, right?
At the end, there were no dry eyes. There could not have been a dry eye. Listen, so be careful when you're riding on a bus or in a taxi and you listen to an episode. In November and December, you're going to cry. Just face that now, and you'll be fine. Okay, so do we have anything else from Mr.
We have one. Okay. That's it for the clips for Bill. So now we got a couple of clips with Mooney Stahl, Guadalcanal veteran. So let me set that up. These clips are relatively short, but. Basically, Mooney Stahl was in the 2nd Regiment of the 2nd Marine Division. Mm-hmm. He joined right after Pearl Harbor. He wanted to go fight the Japanese and kill them. He was really angry at what they did at Pearl Harbor.
Right.
And that's a very common sentiment for Marines in particular for some reason.
Yeah.
Which is why I love the freaking Marine Corps. And there's so I do. I've got family members in the Marine Corps. They're a different breed, man. Yeah. I mean, they're
crazy,
they're
but
the reason why I sit back at night and I see all the chicanery going on in the world. Knowing we've got a Marine Corps makes me feel like we're going to be okay.
Going to sleep well tonight. Yeah.
So at any rate, so he's in the Marine Corps. He goes, and the first battle he's in is the first major offensive operation that the U.S. did during World War II in the Pacific, and it was the Battle of Guadalcanal. But this is where it gets a little different with Mooney.
Right.
So a lot of people, when they think Guadalcanal, they think the Big Island. Guadalcanal. They think... Yeah. Exactly. Henderson Field, they think the Battle of the Tenaroo and Edson's Ridge and all these things. But what a lot of people don't realize is there was 2 invasions that occurred on that day, on August 7th. One was Guadalcanal, which was largely uncontested. But the one that was contested, that one that caused a lot of problems, there's a lot of fighting, was when they invaded the islands to the east in Tulagi in the Florida Islands.
Right.
Those islands were actually the nerve center for that group of islands in the Solomons. That's where the early plantation owners and the business owners and the cities were. It's where the Japanese headquarters were. It's where their best Japanese Imperial Marines were stationed.
Yeah.
That's where the crap hit the fan.
Right.
And so there's a lot of written accounts on Guadalcanal that speak to the men on Guadalcanal standing there wondering where the Japanese are. And then they look to the east, and their brethren, which was just supposed to be a quickie mop-up operation, there's all kinds of action going on over there.
Yeah.
And so what you're going to hear is you're going to hear Mooney Stahl. Mm-hmm. He goes on to Tulagi, and then those 2nd Marine Regiment would be on Tulagi for another 3 or 4 months, and then they would go across the Guadalcanal.
Right.
And that's where they would work with the 1st Infantry Division to push back the Japanese that have continually landed on the island over the course of several months to try to take it back. Okay. So a little bit different perspective. So Ryan, if you could play the first clip, this talks about the Tulagi landing.
One of the first things we captured was a huge set of binoculars on a tripod that belonged to the Japs, and we set that up, and you could actually stand on the top of that tallest hill there on Tulagi and see what was going on. Watch the planes land and take off over Guadalcanal and even see some of the fighting.
So what I thought was interesting about this clip, Ray, is most grunts, most infantrymen only know what's 3 feet in front of them during the war.
Exactly, yes.
A lot of them can't even tell you where they were half the time,
right.
and rightfully so.
Yeah.
But when they landed on Tulagi, they found this pair but this high-end tripod-mounted naval binoculars. And after they made it off the beach and mopped up the Imperial Japanese headquarters, they had a chance to look and see what's going on in Guadalcanal. But what I want to read, this is from Ian Toll's book, The Conquering Tide. Have you ever had Ian Toll on your show?
No, I would love. Yeah, no, go ahead.
The reason I ask is there's a whole bunch of who's who that have been on your show, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if you had Ian Toll on there.
Yeah, no, I need to reach out. I would be willing to sacrifice any of Ryan's body parts to get him on this show. No problem. No, wouldn't hesitate. No, but
I have many pounds of flesh for you to donate.
So I can get a whole bunch of people on. This is going to work out great. This is going to be great. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, at any rate, so Ian Toll wrote a book, The Conquering Tide, and he's got this section that I just want to read really quickly because this describes in ways that Mooney couldn't what happened when they landed on the beach. And so it reads, east of Tulagi lay the minuscule islands of Gavutu, Tanambango, and then Tulagi and the Florida Islands. These islands, so it says here that there were some 500 Japanese naval infantrymen on these islands, often called Japanese Marines. Right. They were dug in the trench lines and artillery emplacement, and they put up an even more desperate fight than their comrades at Tulagi. A pre-landing naval bombardment leveled most of the trees and buildings, but the defenders emerged as soon as the Marines went ashore on Gavutu's northeast coast and pinned the invaders down in a mangrove swamp. Now, this is where it gets unbelievably macabre. This is kind of a harbinger of things to come. Right. The Marines were able to put 2 tanks ashore on Tanambango, but one was destroyed almost immediately. George Kittredge, a gunnery officer on the Chicago, which is a cruiser just offshore, watched through his turret's periscope as a platoon of Japanese troops swarmed over the tank, poured gasoline over it, and set it afire. Yeah. The hatch of the American tank opened, and a Marine emerged. He was knocked down immediately and beaten to death with rifle butts. A Japanese soldier dropped a grenade into the tank, killing the remaining occupant. Kittredge's 8-inch gun fired, and in the next moment, an entire scene had vanished. No tank, no enemy soldiers, quote, just a pall of white smoke and a very large hole in the ground.
Jesus. Yeah,
that was what the invasion was like. Right. Across to the east, while the one in Guadalcanal went uncontested. And I don't think a lot of people know or appreciate that. Absolutely. I just found out recently because of an interview I did that a lot of the troops at the time on Guadalcanal were engineering. You know, they were there doing the bulldozers and still working. They weren't soldiers first and engineers second. It was the other way around. So, yeah, Tulagi had it pretty hard. And again, as you can tell by that, the Americans had a long way to go when it comes to learning the details and the nuances of combat, battle, intelligence, putting your men down, that kind of stuff, and follow. Because as we're
as what's going to happen pretty soon after this is the American naval forces are going to have to bug out. These guys are going to be on their own until like November in Guadalcanal because the Japanese were just, they had more experience. They knew how to slip ships in. So as bad as that was, it's about to get worse for all those troops on Guadalcanal. But again, just those people were vaporized by that gun, and that's just horrid.
And you're right. And you're right. Basically, the Americans realized in his first invasion that they were going against a foe that was very different in terms of how they prosecuted their order of battle and the esprit de corps and their tactics and what we were seeing in Europe. Yeah. And because the Navy bugged out, the 2nd Regiment of the 2nd Marine Division ended up staying in the Tulagi, Florida island areas for about 3 or 4 months. Yeah. And then after a series of really pitched battles where they call it Iron Bottom Sound for a reason, which is the slot, that section of water between the Tulagi and Florida islands to the east and Guadalcanal to the west, because there's so many ships that were sunk there. Yeah. But the Navy was finally able to, the United States Navy was finally able to reassert itself in this area, and then they moved the 2nd Marine Regiment to Guadalcanal proper in the heat of the fighting while the Japanese were landing more and more troops to hold the island. Yes. And so these next clips are going to speak to that.
Okay.
Could you explain some of your experiences while you're in Guadalcanal?
Well, it was hurry up and wait deals, mostly jungle fighting. And what we'd do would be to so many men, so many platoons, so many companies would advance and then have to secure all of that and clean out all those. There's so many hiding places for the Japs, and it was a lot of jungles and a lot of creeks. Just before we got secured it, we pushed the Japs way down to the end of the island, and we were on the side of a hill, and he was firing mortars at us, and I got shrapnel in the right leg, but I picked it out of the pocket knife, wrapped a handkerchief around it. But that's when Major Hill got the bridge of his nose shot off, and then 2 of the guys carried him back to headquarters there on Guadalcanal.
Yeah, so what I did include in there, Ray, is there's some additional commentary from him. When he got the mortar wound in his leg, he picked it out with a pocket knife, but he didn't get it all out. There's all kinds of shrapnel still left in there. Yeah. So when they brought Major Hill back, who had his nose shot off, to the medical facilities, they wanted to evacuate Mooney. And Mooney it basically says, I'll leave this island when the 2nd leaves the island, the 2nd Marine Regiment. He's like, I'm not leaving.
That's loyalty to your brothers. Sorry, go ahead.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. So there was a lot of pitched battles, a lot of fighting going on. And like he says, a lot of hurry up and wait. We've seen miniseries like The Pacific. We read books about Guadalcanal. Yeah. And I don't think what a lot of people appreciate until you really sit down with these veterans and talk to them, that 90% of their time in these campaigns were spent moving, guard duty, sentry, and then it was punctuated by 10% of the time in absolute sheer terror, in ambushes, in frontal assaults and attacks. Yeah. And so I thought he did a pretty good job initially when he talked in the first clip about, jungle fighting, it's just a lot of hurry up and wait sort of thing. It's not like you see in the movies, you know?
I couldn't take the bugs, much less fight anybody. Because, I've done enough of the land right above Australia and some other stuff. And it's like, no, in Philippines, no. I can't even take combat with bugs, no, I'm not a man. I'm not a man.
So Ray, this is a perfect segue to the last 2 clips. Ryan, run them.
Well, the worst thing that happened to me on Guadalcanal was mosquitoes and malaria. And by the time I'd been there, that 3rd or 4th month, I started having chills and fever. And That was the most miserable part of it. We were made to clean up and shave and get a haircut before we go on board ship. Had to shave my beard off. I was a nautical beard. Had to shave that beard off before I could go on board ship. That made me bad.
So if you see Mooney Stahl today, he's got this big, long handlebar mustache, like the old school one. Right. So apparently facial hair is something that mattered to him. But what I liked about that last clip is, for me, when I watched the miniseries The Pacific, and they show these men going to Guadalcanal and living like dogs, and their clothes are falling off them, and they got full beards because they can't shave. Yeah. And they finally get to go on ship, and they just look like death warmed over. Right. And that cook, that Navy orderly, they were basically, they thought that they were forgotten. Yes. These men thought that they were fighting somewhere that no one heard about. And when that Navy cook said, "What are you talking about? You guys are heroes." Oh. I thought that was an emotional part of the miniseries for me. Yeah. And I can only imagine what Mooney experienced when he finally got to go on the ship with all those clean Navy guys, and they looked like terrible. He had malaria, he had a beard. And it also speaks to something else, Ray. Mm-hmm. Our job as historians and as oral historians is to be able to make sure that these men don't feel like they were forgotten, that they don't feel like the things that they did were in vain. Yeah. I think what made that scene so powerful for me, when they all said, who cares? We're over here, a bunch of our men died and we look like crap and we lost 50 pounds. And the guy's like, no, everyone in the newspaper's talking about you. Yeah. You guys are heroes. I want to know more about it. Exactly. I think these sort of things help validate and reinforce that, what we as a society, our narrative should be that we appreciate and respect the sacrifices that you guys have made.
Absolutely, because we know what happened after Vietnam. That didn't go so well when we didn't honor. We were upset about the war, but these are just the warriors following orders. Don't blame them. But no, you're absolutely right. That's why you guys, and I'm just going to say this, what you're doing is more important than what I'm doing. I mean, you're actually talking to these people. You're getting down their experiences. What I'm doing, they could get from a book. There just wouldn't be any Ray. And who wants a world without Ray? But anyway, But seriously, that's why I love what you guys are doing, because you're getting the essence, the flavor, the feel of what it was like. And it doesn't matter that there was 70, 80 years ago and their voices have changed and they're barely getting this out because I don't know if they want to talk about it or not, but it's being captured, and that is priceless.
Amen. You know what, Ray? To kind of push back on some of your comments about the unimportance of what you're doing. You've
don't
been
push
doing
back
this.
on Ray. Don't push back on Ray.
Okay, that's right. Now it's my turn to get smoked
here. Watch yourself, Tony. No, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, careful now. Let me reconstitute what I was going to say. Please. No, you've been doing this. Your first podcast, I was shocked when I went through Apple and checked it out, was on December 31st, 2011. You've been doing this for around 12 years. You've led the way. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to know about your podcast.
Oh, thank you.
I think, like you said, then we met with you last year. There is a really interesting symbiosis between what the two of us are doing.
Right.
You're doing the research for people. You're making it available for them. And we're just trying to add some color behind the words from the books that were written. And I can't tell you how excited Ryan and I were to be reinvited back on your podcast and be able to do this. We're like a couple of dogs on point with our tails twitching right now.
No, I appreciate that. You're great. I'm great. Ryan's pretty good. No, but I really do appreciate it. And sometimes you don't even know what you're doing. You just you do it day after day after day, and then someone comes. It's like when the cook said, "Oh no, you guys are heroes." It's like, oh, there are people actually out there listening to me, and they like it, because you don't think about it. You're just so in the minutia, the details.
Yeah, absolutely. So you may or may not want to include this in the podcast, but I'm just curious at this point.
Yeah.
How long were you podcasting before you got to a point where you felt like, holy cow, people are listening to this. They're interested in this. There's other people who want to kind of be on my show. How long did it take you to go from fresh podcaster with this idea to go on a day-by-day look at World War II to being, holy crap, I think people are liking this?
Well, this is going to sound like we were saying earlier about, the slowly boiling the frog. It's good that this happened so slowly because, the idea of actually being out in public and talking to people and doing what you do scared me. No, the fact that I did it for a couple of years and I just built up a body of work. I was desperate financially, even though there was no money coming from this. I don't know. It just happened so gradual. I even to this day, I still don't think about it. You've seen the movie Bull Durham with Kevin Costner. Don't think, just do. That's my entire life. When I think, I screw things up. When I just go with instinct, it seems to work out. So I would love to answer your question. There's no master plan. There's no realization. I should have kept a diary, but it was just like suddenly I'm getting letters from publishers. Oh, can my guy be on your show? And I'm like, yes. Yeah. Oh, okay. Now I got to figure this out. Cool. Great. So, but it's like you guys. It's a labor of love. I don't ever think about it, and you're just waiting. You're just working on the next episode.
I appreciate you saying that. Again, this is our first year. So I had a chance to go back to your first year and see what you were doing. And I'm just curious how someone who's been doing it longer, kind of how it evolved and what it looks like. And again, I just want to say thanks again for having us on the show. And I hope that your audience appreciates some of these stories we're able to share with you guys today.
I think so. I mean, if someone like me with my enthusiasm can completely geek out, anybody who's taken the time to buy way too many history books or listen to a podcast that's been going on for 12 years and will probably go for 20 more, they're geeking out too. So no, you guys keep this up because it is needed and it is wanted.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for having us on your show, Ray. Absolutely. We couldn't be happier.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and book for next November. Let's go ahead and set that in stone now. And then we'll just do a 1-year anniversary. We'll keep checking on you guys.
And so what we can do is we can just kind of give best of clips like this again. Yes. And the other thing that we want to share with you is if at any time when you're doing your podcast, if you want to have some oral history, little snippets that you can tuck in there, just send Ryan and I an email saying, hey, do you have anything on this? And if we do, because we got spreadsheets of all these interviews we've done, we'll impressive. Cut out some clips and you can use them. We don't care how you use them. One of the reasons why we did this was so people like you and researers and people who evaluate history can do it. Yeah. So just keep that in mind that if you ever need to reinforce something, we'll be happy to send you some clips.
Absolutely. I will threaten to do that. Yes, no, that would be absolutely brilliant. And it would, add another wrinkle to it. After 10 or 11 or 12 years, I think people might appreciate a little wrinkle. So again, I do appreciate it. But Tony, Ryan, thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for coming on.
Ray.
And I'll see you next November. Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 394, part 2, Tobruk has fallen. Last time, Rommel had chased 8th British Army all the way back to the Egyptian frontier, where Allied countermeasures were underway, to be sure. But that wasn't Rommel's concern for the moment. No, he was currently manifesting a year-long desire. He was going to take Tobruk and then advance into Egypt. Meanwhile, General Ritchie and C Auchinleck believed they had the time to prepare themselves. But like the concept that time works differently in the desert, time was also viewed differently by the desert fox. Things that would take others a day, he could do in hours, like the building up of the frontier defensive line or a counter-attack unit. Ritchie needed weeks. But Rommel's big move against Tobruk, that was coming in 3 days' time. One of the main reasons Rommel was able to throw together his attack on Tobruk so quickly was that the plan had already been hashed out. In fact, it had been ready to go since early 1941, but Operation Crusader ruined the chance. Yes, the British had lost hundreds of tanks to Rommel's 100 tanks, but it had been enough to force him to pull back and focus on his supply lines. Now, here, in June 1942, that was not an issue for the Desert Fox, and his attack would start on June 20th. Even better, Kesselring strongly supported Rommel by scrounging every plane in Western Europe that was under his control, and he added it to this attack. Tobruk would be hit in its southeast corner, where the 10th Indian Brigade was stationed. But to make sure that none of the armed units General Norrie was putting together along the Egyptian border came roaring to the rescue, Rommel had a bit of sleight of hand prepared. He ordered the Africa Corps, along with the Ariete Division, thus representing the Italians, to line up at Gambit, Ritchie's former headquarters. As Gambit is about 20 miles or 32 kilometers east of Tobruk's outer perimeter, just below the Via Balbia, it looked to Ritchie as if Rommel was lining up his forces, readying for a big push into Egypt. Ritchie nor any of his officers were really worried about this, as Rommel's supply line would be that much longer and open to air attacks. No, if Africa Corps came this way, they would not like how it turned out. But further benefiting Rommel, if he so chose to head for Egypt, the 90th Light Division had already captured Bardia, just northwest of the Egyptian border, given how the terrain juts north at that area. And if anything, this capture made Ritchie and Auchinleck even more convinced that Rommel was coming their way. But he was not. His goal was Tobruk. It had always been Tobruk, and now he would have it. And June 20th finally arrived. At 1 a.m. that day, Ritchie wrote the following to Auchinleck. There have been no signs today of any effort except with small reconnaissance detachments to press eastwards towards the frontier. I feel that having removed our air threat from Gambit group of aerodromes, he is likely to turn his main attention on Tobruk. True enough, but it would be the speed of the attack that would shock the defenders. About 5 miles or 8 kilometers below the Tobruk perimeter was El Abdin, and that's where Rommel and General Friedrich von Mellenthin, a Africa Corps staff officer, were standing, about to watch the attack get underway on a specific segment of the perimeter. Von Mellenthin would write of this moment, promptly at 5:20 a.m., the Stukas flew over. Kesselring has been as good as his word and sent hundreds of bombers in dense formation. They dived on the perimeter in one of the most spectacular attacks I have ever seen. All told, there would be just over 700 Axis sorties flown this day. He goes on to say that the bombings were then joined by a massive artillery attack and ended his observation with, the combined weight of the artillery and bombing was terrific, and as we soon realized, had a crushing effect on the morale of the Maratha battalion in that sector. After this hell on earth was stopped, the German sappers of the 900th Engineer Battalion and infantry charged in. The infantry were on the lookout, while the sappers cleared a path through the minefield and then bridged an anti-tank ditch. It helped that there were far fewer mines than last time, and most were now behind or below the Gazala line. At 8:20 a.m., the panzers of 15th and 21st Panzer started crossing into Allied defended territory, not to mention the men of the Ariete Division. How would the 32,000 or so defenders respond? Not very well, actually. The last time that Rommel came hard for Tobruk, the Australians had taught the Teutons a little humility with their intense artillery attacks and, more importantly, their very intense counterattacks. But the Australians were not the ones facing the invaders this time. No, this time it was the South Africans and Indians, and they were not well led. As the panzers poured into the now breached perimeter, the first one went by at 8:30 a.m., they expected at any second a massive artillery barrage. Yes, some of their panzers would be lost, but their goal was to keep moving. But the shells never came. Well, that intensely. First, the control of coordinating the South Africans' guns was not all that impressive. That was shock one for the leading Germans. Next, the eventual counterattacks of the 32nd Army Tank Brigade and the 201st Guards Brigade was not focused or well coordinated. Thus, the invaders took them out in small groups, driving the rest back. At least the men of the Ariete Division had been held back at the perimeter for a while, that is, until they were told to follow the path of the panzers. That way was still open and clear. The Maratha soldiers from central West India, where the breach had taken place, sent in their last reserves and were told that a tank battalion was on its way. The men just had to hold out. The tanks never came, and the men could not hold out. To the southeast of the actual port city that is Tobruk was a place called King's Cross, and both panzer groups had reached it by noon. At this point, the panzer divisions split. By now, there were some 113 panzers within the perimeter. The 21st Panzer went to the north, towards Tobruk itself, while the 15th Panzer went to the west, to keep any enemy units there pinned down, so they could not assist those beleaguered in the city. The men and panzers of the 21st pushed their way north, as if their willpower alone was getting the job done. At 5 p.m., they ordered the artillery to stop firing on the town as they themselves were about to enter it. This left the 15th Panzer free to protect the 21st's left flank as they drove to the coast. Also, the 15th was expected to neutralize Pilastrino Ridge, where Fort Pilastrino sat atop, located about 5 miles southwest of Tobruk. This turned out to be easier than expected, as the men of the 201st Guards Brigade took up positions that were not good for defense, but in their panic they settled down before looking around. Thus the panzers of the 15th killed, captured, or chased away as many of these men as they could, who retreated to the fort, and there they waited for the Germans to come to them. But that was not the 15th Panzer's job. They had to hold back any units from the western sector of the Tobruk area from aiding in the city. But in the midst of this building access victory came a massive mistake by General Hendrik Balthazar Klopper, commander of the 2nd South African Infantry Division. Though the division was a brigade short, General Klopper's division represented about 1/3 of the total defense of Tobruk, and at the moment, his 6th Brigade was in the perimeter's northwest corner, keeping an eye on the Sabatra division, which Rommel had placed there, just outside of the boundary, to keep those defenders in place, but also to make sure they could not escape when the day was won. No use in fighting these same men another day. This left the 4th South African Brigade to patrol below the fort, close to the southwestern border of the perimeter. But this is where Klopper, either from his intelligence or his instincts, told him that his headquarters was about to be overrun. Indeed, it had just been bombed by one of Kesselring's sorties. So the general had all radios, all equipment, and all papers destroyed. Then he retreated to the headquarters of his 6th South African Brigade in the northwest corner. This was at 6:30 p.m. But what he had actually done was make sure that he could not assist in or direct the defenses of his areas of responsibility, thus making the attacker's job that much easier. As darkness came, the Germans close to the city went deeper in, grabbing prisoners and vehicles as they could. Now, overall, the defenders still had options, as in they still had units intact throughout the perimeter. The South Africans still controlled the western sector, the 201 Guards Brigades were in the center, and a part of the 11th Indian Brigade was still fighting in the east, facing whatever fresh Axis forces were still coming through the breach. What the Allies did not have was effective command and control of their forces. Which may not sound sexy, but control is the very element that gives shape and power to a group of men with guns. Without it, their world would fall around them, as it was currently doing. Meanwhile, within Tobruk itself, the Allied demolition plan was in high gear, except for those areas already captured by the Germans, and that area was being enlarged as every minute passed by. Some of this was getting back to General Klopper, who then made a decision. He radioed to all available troops to prepare to evacuate this very night. But of course, Ritchie had to give his approval. So Klopper and Ritchie began swapping messages around 9 p.m. In the end, Ritchie told Klopper to evacuate, but to wait until tomorrow night. This was because Ritchie wanted to clear a pathway for the men to leave. But unbeknownst to him, Rommel was standing in the very place Ritchie wanted to clear, El Abdin. Also, Ritchie reminded Klopper to destroy all of the petrol before they left. No sense in giving Rommel the means to reach the Egyptian border. But events on the ground, and this was not the first time, were making Ritchie's plans beyond mute. As the general's words were going out, the 21st Panzer, now deep inside Tobruk, captured most of the lorries or trucks to be used by the escaping infantry. The best that could be done at this point was to take what trucks remained, load as many men in them as possible, while the rest of the men continued to fight. There was nothing else for it. Thus did Klopper radio Ritchie at 2 a.m. and say, "Am sending mobile troops out tonight. Not possible to hold tomorrow." Then came the words, "Mobile troops, nearly naught. Enemy captured vehicles. Will resist to last man and last round." And yet, as the next 3 hours went by, with Klopper waiting for the sun to rise, he realized that sending his men out would only get them killed. They did not have enough trucks. It was simple as that. Fighting in the desert against an enemy that has vehicles is pointless. So, at dawn, a white flag went up over the headquarters of the 6th South African Brigade, where Klopper was. And with that, Rommel suddenly had 32,000 prisoners, 19,000 British, 10,500 South Africans, and 2,500 Indians. But in the next few hours, Rommel would also find out that he had tons of supplies that had not been destroyed in time. The fall of Tobruk shook the British, and Churchill most of all, as had the fall of Singapore. Another supposed fortress was lost, and embarrassingly quickly. At the time of the message, Churchill was in Washington and rushed home, but he should not have. What awaited him was a motion of censure in the House of Commons, expressing no confidence in his conduct of the war. The old bulldog would survive this vote, but it aged him, and it made him wonder, when will this hellscape end, or at least turn around? But most historians are quick to point out the reasons that Tobruk fell and that they cannot be placed solely on Churchill's shoulders. First, Tobruk was no longer the fortress that it once had been. Most of its mines had been removed for the Gazala line. The wire along the perimeter had fallen into disrepair, and several sections of the anti-tank ditch had filled up with blowing sand. And simply put, when it became likely that Tobruk would be attacked directly on June 12th, as in the Gazala line would not hold, there was not enough time in those 8 days to make good the repairs. And that's one of the main whys of Rommel's need for speed. Speed always pays off. Next, Rommel's panzer crews were experienced. They had fought during Operation Crusader and then were victorious at Gazala, whereas Klopper's Indians were mostly inexperienced but hopeful. Also, the plans and defense rehearsals last time Tobruk was attacked had been thorough. This time, not so much. But it has to be said that Klopper did not have the staff like the previous time. Simply, it was too much for them to handle. The last time Tobruk was defended, in 1941, the Australians, under General Leslie Morshead, had learned as they went. And as the days and weeks went by, the Aussies became more confident in themselves, and they learned the art of desert warfare. Whereas General Klopper's inexperienced men did not have that luxury, not the luxury of time, to learn their craft. It was over within a single sunrise and sunset. And of course, there is Churchill, Auchinleck, and Ritchie. Trying to push aside hindsight for a moment, the integrity of the messages between these three was less than perfect, and much of that has to be laid at the feet of Ritchie. And yet, Auchinleck was his boss, but the buck stops with the person at the top of the pile, that being Churchill. But now, they all had to deal with this theater of war coming undone. And what did that mean for Malta? Whereas Rommel received a field marshal's baton from Hitler for his latest and greatest victory. Postscript. General Klopper escaped from captivity in 1943 and was exonerated by a 1942 court of inquiry into the Tobruk disaster. For those asking, where was Allied air power? The truth is, these orders, like those of the anti-tank units, the infantry, and the tanks, were garbled or misunderstood. The only Allied air attack was the raid on the Panzers as they came through the breach, that being 9 Douglas Boston medium bombers, protected by another American plane, a long-range Kitty Hawk fighter. The fighters had been cutting edge back in 1935, but by mid-1942, they were beginning to be seen as obsolete.